back, everybody. This is Edwin, the Magic Engineer, and I'm back to talk about a very interesting topic. And I kind of don't really want to make this video, but I want to get some information out there that a lot of people are misunderstanding. This, unfortunately, is a response video for the professor because he made a video very recently where he said the reserve list is a lie. And he said several things that are unfortunately very deeply incorrect. And although we would all love it for the reserve list for him to be right and the reserve list to get abolished and then all these old card prices to stay high and a bunch of new players come in, that would be great, but that's not the reality of it. That's not what's going to happen. And what's basically happened is I've made a bunch of videos. Other people have made videos. There's another guy online named Dan Bock who owns power9.com. He's spoken about the reserve list like at length, and he's posted articles and stuff. And he even did a response on Facebook in some private groups. And I've printed out his actual responses right here. And I'm going to read his responses, and I'm actually going to add some information to them because he's very correct in what he actually says. And I'm going to agree with him and add a little bit of oomph, and unfortunately disagree with what the professor is saying. And please, you guys, don't just go hate the video, flame me and stuff like that. It's not about this is the way I want this to go. In fact, I'm constantly trying to bring people into old Magic. I'm trying to extend that arm out and help people actually join this game. But reprinting the reserve list and abolishing it, it's first of all, it's not going to happen. And it wouldn't have the effect that people think it's going to happen. So let's get into that. So Dan listed 11 things that the professor is wrong about. And I actually threw one onto the end there, so a virtual one added by Edwin. So first he says, meaning the professor, they complained just like is often the case, the Wizards of the Coast listened. Now, and this is Dan replying, I can't tell if he's being sarcastic. However, there is one thing I do know about Wizards of the Coast, is that they rarely take customer feedback into account. They just do whatever they think is best. Sometimes it is what people complain for, sometimes not. But to imply that they frequently buckle under pressure is just historically inaccurate. For example, people have been complaining about the reserve list for 20 years, and they haven't removed that. And there's other things that people have complained about, like over just many years. Like one of them is just the expense of the packs. And what are they doing now? They're driving up the expensive packs even more. You know, people wanted things to become more available, and Wizards refuses to reprint things. And then if they do, they put them in these packs that are these special editions that are very expensive. They've never turned the game into just a game. So many people want it to be a game. But Wizards, it's really not just a game. It's still a collectible that by them, and you know that based on the fact that everything is put into randomized packs, meaning that you have to buy boxes to get everything that you're going for. You're not going to get it. You can't go to the store and buy your latest set. You have to buy a randomized box and hope that you get stuff, which you don't, and you have to actually go buy more or go to the secondary market. It's still a collectible, even though people have asked for that for years, right? So no, Wizards, he's exactly right. They don't give people what they want. Wizards makes their own best decision on what they think will actually be best. And that's not necessarily bad, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Wizards sometimes has the correct vision on what actually is best, because sometimes the player base asks for things that would just ruin the game. So I'm not knocking them for it, but it's definitely not a case of they just buckle. No, it doesn't happen. So Dan's point number 2, the reserved list is one of the biggest things holding the game back today. That's what the professor said. And Dan said, no, it's not. You could try to argue that the reserve list is holding back some of the older formats from developing. That claim at least makes sense. However, it too is historically inaccurate. The biggest thing holding back the development of old formats is WotC's refusal to support those old formats. Those formats thrived when the reserve list existed and when WotC supported them. They have withered to some extent when the reserve list still exists. What changed was WotC's support went away. So that's a very valid point, and it's exactly right. I remember back in the days when we were doing the Type 1, Type 1.5, Type 2, all that, before they called it Standard and everything. there was support of the Type 1.5 format and the Type 1 format. And then over the years, all of Wizards' attention got focused into standard and the newer cards and stuff like that. And they intentionally pulled back their focus on what eventually became vintage and legacy type formats. That was a very intentional decision. Now, I don't knock them for them. I understand why they did it, because they don't make any money when people play with cards they've already owned for 20 years. They're in the business of selling new cards, right? So it's really in their best interest to keep people buying the new stuff, supporting the newer formats. So that is what it is, right? Like, and they did pull back that support, and every format that they've pulled away from has absolutely diminished. And so he's exactly right. It's definitely a case where the largest thing that diminishes those formats is their lack of support. But it is also true that the price of those formats does make a difference as well. Definitely true, which is why I advocate for proxies, by the way. Anyways, let's continue. This is point number 3. This is Professor speaking. If they reprinted dual lands, they would lose value. At the end of the day, they're still collector's pieces. Now, Dan replied and said, that's just not how economics works. It's relatively simple supply and demand here. You could argue they won't go down much, which they would. But to say that they won't go down at all is just silly. Dan is exactly right. If a bunch of supply hit the market, the dual lands that exist right now, all of them, even the alpha beta, would drop for sure. Because if for no other reason, people would be scared that there would be a drop. And so that fear would cause some of them to rush into the market. And remember, for an item like that, you only need 1% of the available stock to come into the market to start driving down prices. Because if there aren't buyers and there's a lot of sellers, the market price is determined by the buyers and the sellers meeting in the middle. So even if 99% of the people didn't put their stuff for sale, the 1% that did, if they didn't have enough buyers to meet that 1%, then the price would start dropping. That's how that works. So he's exactly right, that the prices would actually drop. Now, in addition to the fact that is correct, the revised copies would go down much more, because the point is made later that the oldest versions are what people actually want. In this case, meaning like alpha, beta, maybe even unlimited. The revised ones, like the color is a little bit lighter and they were just printed in mass quantities. Like anything reserve list that's like revised would just get destroyed, honestly, in value, and probably not recover very much at all, because the people that want those originals are going to want the alpha beta originals. They're not going to want those revised reprints as much. So yeah, revised would get decimated if the reserve list got abolished, and they would not recover back up probably very well at all. So, okay, number 4. Professor said, and this is the point that everybody keeps making. This is the big point people keep repeating, and it's wrong. It drives me crazy because it's wrong. Professor said, and we can prove this, meaning that the prices won't drop. With the original printings of non-reserve list cards, and this is where the professor was talking about the Shivan Dragon and the Birds of Paradise from Alpha. Here's what Dan said. No, you can't, because for reserve list cards, the value of the reserve list is already baked into them. So while Alpha Birds of Paradise still has a ton of value, even though it has been reprinted, the card Birds of Paradise has never been an attribute of being on the reserve list. What Dan is basically saying there is the exact same thing that I've said in other videos when I talk about things being priced in. Remember that the market is always many things affecting each side. Buyers have reasons they want to buy, and they're all different reasons, right? Sellers have reasons they want to sell. And all these forces meet in the middle. Everyone's got their own reasons, but in the end, one of those wins, and then it'll get to a certain spot, and that's the market price. It's like a tug-of-war game is what I'm basically describing here. There's buyers versus sellers, and they're all tug-of-warring, but they're all meeting at a price in the middle that just moves while that collective thing moves. And if you lose one of the big players on one side, it just means that rope moves to the other side a little bit. The reserve list is one of those players. So you take a card like Birds of Paradise. It was never on the reserve list. It never had people, and this is the key, there was never people that were forced to buy Birds of Paradise from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, something like that, because there was not copies existing in like other sets when those sets existed. It wasn't a thing because they got reprinted in 4th edition. They got reprinted in 5th edition. They got reprinted in even some expansions like Ravnica and stuff like that. So there's all these printings out there that exist, right? So if you want Birds of Paradise, you're not forced to go buy a very expensive reserve list copy. You can pick from any one of these other copies, right? So the price of an alpha Birds of Paradise is not going to get affected by all these other ones being printed because that's already been priced in. That effect has already taken impact upon that card. It's not a member pulling on that rope. I really want to get this point across because even other famous Magic the Gathering channels miss this. When something is priced in, it's a very important component because it can't be priced in again, right? If people look at a stock that's in the stock market and they think, oh, well, it's Johnson & Johnson and they screwed up, Splenda as a product or something like that. And we think Splenda's killing people and that's going to hurt the stock. Well, the market will hear about it. The price will drop a little bit. And then if someone else hears that, oh, Splenda again is killing people, the price isn't going to drop anymore because that's already been priced in. That's already discounted in from that total market price. Do you get the idea? Birds of Paradise and Shivan Dragon will not be affected by reserve list anything because they were never on the reserve list. There's already copies. Now, you take a card like Force Field, right? Take an Alpha Force Field, which is on the reserve list, and if you want a copy, you got Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, that's it. That's all the copies you can get, right? If you want to buy a Force Field, you have to buy one of those editions. Now, if a bunch of other Force Fields come out, printed in some other set, well, the price of Force Field is going to drop because people who had to buy it from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, if they just wanted the card and they didn't honestly care what set, every one of those people can now go get it from this other place and they can sell their expensive copy, get a bunch of money and put that into other cards or something else, right? So, Professor, don't miss that point. When things are priced in, that's incredibly important. That's completely what you missed on that point. Okay, I've spent enough time on it. Please, Magic community, go figure that out. Okay, number 5. The professor later argues that reprints would raise the price of old cards because more people would play the formats. Dan responded and said, there is something to this argument. However, there is a lot of causality. There is a causality error here. I agree if more people played the formats, the original printings would go up. However, fewer people play the formats now than could possibly because the formats aren't supported, and that's deliberately. If Wizards of the Coast supported the formats, the original prices would go up. If Wizards of the Coast reprinted the cards, the prices would go down. If WotC did both, who knows? Now, Dan, again, is exactly right. What he's describing is what I was just talking about. There's market forces on each side, buyers and sellers, and they're all pushing against each other, and then things will meet in the middle, right? The colliding forces you've got here is if you reprint a card and you bring a ton of people into a format, right? That brings buyers into a format. And if even a small percentage of those new buyers want those old cards, that could raise the price of those old cards. That's true. That is correct. And so prices of old cards can, in fact, go up when new demand comes in and decides that they want them. So that is like a guy on one side of the rope pulling one way. Now, on the other side of the rope, pulling the other direction, is the fact that you've now increased the supply massively, and all the supply comes flooding into the market, which drops prices. So it's the question, which one is going to pull harder? Is it going to be the new people coming into the market wanting to buy, driving prices up? Or is it going to be the massive flooding of inventory into the market, pulling those prices down? It's a debate. Which one is going to be actually larger? And I think it would actually change card per card based on the amount of printings and stuff like that. So some of them would probably go up over time. Some of them would probably go down over time. But again, all of them would drop. If they abolish the reserve list, all of them are going to drop by at least some percent. And some of them will never recover. Okay, so number 6. Many of the legions of new players would gravitate towards wanting the originals and their value would go up. So like Dan said, and I'll repeat what Dan says here, this is similar to point number 5, but is worth noting that this doesn't make much sense. He's both arguing that we need reprints because there's a demand for reprints, but he's also arguing that there exist people who would buy the originals at non-deflated prices. So I kind of already covered that in like the last point, but Dan's correct. Okay, number 7. The professor said the idea that people would sue Wizards of the Coast is a load of bullplop. Dude, I literally know people that have Magic collections worth tens of millions that directly told me I will sue them. Yes! Why do you think people won't sue Wizards of the Coast? There's people, like, everybody hates MTG investors, right? Like, by the way, I'm not an MTG investor. All my cards are play cards. I play with all of them. I don't invest in any of them. But everybody seems to hate MTG investors, right? If those are investors and they put a whole bunch of their money, maybe retirement money, maybe just straight up investment money, I don't know, maybe they sell things that they needed to invest in Magic to make money so they can pay for a surgery. There's stories all over the place. The point is, people do invest. And when that money drops massively because Wizards of the Coast broke a promise and did something they said they're never going to do, hell yes, people are going to sue. And then once one of those lawsuits start, it'll probably be others tacking onto it and become this big class action thing. So no, you're just wrong. People will, in fact, sue. Okay, number 8. You would ultimately have an incredibly hard time proving that a change to the reserve list has caused you detriment. And then Dan was being a little like jokey here, a little tongue-in-cheek. He said, if there were only websites out there that tracked the values of cards that using actual sales to establish a marketplace for value. Well, I guess since that doesn't exist, yeah, you got me, Professor. I can't claim the value of my cards. Oh, wait, tcgplayer.com. That's right, it does exist. So yes, so it's Dan's joke, tongue-in-cheek. He's correct, though. Absolutely, it would be extremely easy to prove that the price of cards is tanked. You could just look at the amount of cards for sale on inventory, like on eBay or any of these other sites. You could look at the average prices on MTG Goldfish, TCG Player, the average prices that have been listed on Star City Games. You can look at the drop and buy list prices. There'd be so many ways to prove it. I don't even know why he made that point, why he tried to claim that. Number 9. The reserve list has been changed many times and there were no lawsuits. This is one of the few things in this video that this is Dan replying, that he said, which is 100% true. However, the reason people didn't sue is because the changes occurred at a time when the value of the cards wasn't significant enough to make the suing worthwhile. Now we're at a point where the total value of the reserve list is at $5 billion. And of course, that's paper napkin math, but it's probably not that far off. Changes now that decreased value significantly would result in lawsuits. And so, yes, Dan's exactly right. The changes that happened to the reserve list, either they were one of two camps. A, they actually increased the security of the reserve list. And remember, people were trying to protect their card values, right? If something increases their card value or increases their security, they're not going to get upset about that. So why'd you even make that point? Ignore that. The other one, which is almost valid to make, is that some cards were like taken off of the reserve list. Now that one is the one that's worth discussing. But you got to look at which cards were taken off. You look at cards that at the time they were taken off were not expensive cards. I mean, oh my gosh. A revised Demonic Tutor back in those days was like not really worth much money at all. Even like an Alpha Beta Demonic Tutor at that point was really not worth that much money. Now today it is. But at the time that they actually took it off, it would be like, we're going to take a Beta Island off the reserve list. And everybody would be like, so? Nobody would care at this point because it's just not an expensive card. So he left that point out, which makes it, in my opinion, a little bit disingenuous that he tried to state it like it was a big fact about it. Now, about the no lawsuits existing, now here's where I could actually be wrong. But I could swear I remember hearing about a lawsuit that was brewing somewhere around the Phyrexian Negator, that one that accidentally got reprinted. I could swear I remember hearing about a lawsuit that was actually beginning, but then it was like taken away when there was like the reserve list came back and was solidified more. So I don't know, that could be hearsay. I swear I remember hearing a story something about that. So there might have been one brewing. Anyways, let's move forward. Number 10, Statute of Limitations. Many of you take, okay, so this is, he didn't really so much quote the professor. He is just like, this is Dan speaking for himself. Many of you take personal swings at me saying, you're not a lawyer, so shut up. except in a nicer or meaner way. Well, this part is from a real, an actual real person lawyer. Okay, so here's the lawyer quote, right? The technical answer is that a cause of an action accrues when the victim is actually injured or could reasonably discover the injury where it's not immediately obvious. So there is no statute of limitations here because the promise hasn't been violated. And now he gives an example. For example, in Indiana, the statute of limitations for a breach of contract is 10 years. If you and I have an ongoing contract for 15 years, and then you breach, you can't argue statute of limitations based on the fact that the contract is 15 years old because the breach just happened last week. So let me translate that lawyer speak for you. The lawyer speak is basically saying it's not when the promise was made, it's when the damage was done. And the damage is done when the reserve list is broken. And at this moment, the reserve list has not been broken. So if Wizards of the Coast breaks the reserve list, start a clock. And that's what, at some point after that is when you can claim statute of limitations. But trust me, it won't get there. A lawsuit will be forthcoming in short order if they broke it, or if they even hinted at breaking it. If they even came out and said, we're thinking about breaking it, there would probably be lawsuits triggered. Okay, number 11. There wasn't a single lawsuit when the changes in 2010 happened. And Dan says here, correct, because they tightened the promise by saying, okay, we won't do foil promos of reserve list cards. For example, tomorrow if they said we're adding Rishadan Port and Mana Drain to the reserve list, people would not sue because they're only tightening the promise. Exactly correct. They're not going to sue if something doesn't threaten their financial value. Remember, guys, lawsuits are always about damages. It's always about suing for money, right? Money is almost always the case of what you're suing for, but damages, right? If there's no damages, there's no lawsuit. And no one's going to sue because you gave them money. Okay, so that's where Dan's points were done, and I'm throwing Edwin's virtual point in because Dan and others have made this point, but he didn't state it in this one, so I'm going to throw it out there because people keep also saying, I see in the comments and stuff in the professor's video, but Wizards of the Coast will make all this money if they print all these reserve list cards. You can only make that claim when you've never looked at the numbers. You guys, you got to look at the numbers. Okay, here's some numbers. In fact, I'm going to leave a link for this below. Wizards of the Coast has an estimated net revenue of $500 million in 2019. And that's based on Hasbro's net income and somebody's best guess for if you were to take Wizards of the Coast net revenue, which is basically your revenue minus your expenses is your net revenue. Wizards of the Coast is probably like around 500 million after you take out the expenses, which by the way is pretty good. They're doing better than they were doing before, as I recall, based on the numbers I heard before. Now, they produce a lot of sets every year. They produce a lot of events, right? They make money from their online game. They make money from events. They make money from selling cards. They make money from specialties. It's all over the place, right? Remember, 500 million is the amount they make in total. Now, there's not a lot of reserve list cards out there, right? If they were going to abolish the reserve list, would they make money? Yes, for sure. Yes. Would they be able to sell some sets? Like, would people put money into those sets to buy them to get those previously reserve list cards? Yes, for sure. That's absolutely for sure. But what would really be the amount of increase they're probably going to get? Now, if we're extremely generous, if we say, wow, maybe they raised their actual profit margin by 25%, which is a lot, right? Let's say Wizards of the Coast made an additional 125 million of net revenue every single year, which is a 25% increase because they actually abolished the reserve list, right? Well, this is where you need to actually apply some math, some paper napkin math. And to make this point, I want to describe to you how much potential damages are out there for reserve list being broken. A good one to look at is the revised Dual Lands, because revised is a set that's going to get annihilated. It's not the original printing. It's not even as nice, deep, rich color, right? And there's a lot of them out there. So there is 289,000 revised rares. Of each rare, there's 289,000 of them that were actually created. Now there's 10 different Dual Lands. So you take 280, like, do this on the calculator with me, guys. 289,000 times 10, right? You got a number, right? Now, you can go right up there to TCG Player and look at the average price per revised dual land. And I already did. It is $404.70 as of right now is the average price per revised dual land. So you take the 289,000, you multiply it by 10, you multiply it by $404.70, and you get 1.17 billion. Now, I just told you that being very generous and just taking a guess at it, maybe Wizards would make another 125 million in net revenue. So you tell me, Mr. Business Owner, would you risk a $1.17 billion lawsuit to make $125 million? One of these is $1 billion, the other one's $1 million, and they're on the wrong sides. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. And I only talked about revised dual lands. Have you guys seen the prices of Power 9? We didn't even talk about those. I didn't talk about anything inside of Legends or Arabian Nights or Antiquities. All these $3,000-$4,000 cards that exist. We didn't even mention that. We only looked at revised dual lands. And that was over $1 billion of total value that could be lost and part of a potential lawsuit. Wizards of the Coast knows that. That's why they won't break the reserve list. It's why they won't even hint at it. So you guys have got to stop saying the reserve list is going to go away. It's not going to go away. Now, I'm sorry. I want you guys to be able to play. I want people to have access to cards. But it's not going to go away. And all this arguing and all this digging up of all this old issues like the professor did, he really should have done his research on this one. He really should have spoken to people that could have actually concretely answered these questions for him. Because all that he did is he posted this video, he made a bunch of people upset, and everyone's talking about it, and they're still wrong. It's still not going to happen. And I'm sorry, guys. That is the way that it actually is. But here's what actually can happen. If you guys actually start supporting proxies, if you stop getting all huffy about somebody actually using a proxy, and of course in some formats like standard, go to a DCI tournament, fine, no proxies there. No one's arguing for that. But my old school deck, the one I was just playing the other day with my friend was like $70,000 that thing is worth, right? What should I expect if people can't spend 70 grand? They can't play a game with me? No, man, no. In some formats, just get off your horse. Let people play proxies. Let people join and enter the game. And I'm telling you guys, if you allow proxies more in your like social play, and just at least in some environments, here's what happens. People that can't play the game now can play the game. They get to show up, and nobody wants to use a proxy. Nobody. Because like it's the same reason everybody likes foils and blingy stuff. So people will show up with a deck that has as many real cards as possible, and they only proxy the stuff that they can't have, right? That's what people always do. And then as soon as that they decide that it's worth it to them and they love it, they will happily toss that proxy and they will go buy a real card to replace it. I can't tell you how many times I've brought people into Magic and they've played games with proxy decks, and then the first time they buy their very first dual land or their very first demonic tutor or their very first foil Jace or something, they show it to me and they're all excited. And that proxy gets tossed and the better card comes in and they're all excited. That's always the way it works. If you support proxies, more people get to play. That solves the problem, right? And then the collector's value doesn't get damaged because the reserve list never got hit. More printings never actually came out. And then when people actually come into the game because they love it and now they're actually going out and buying those cards, the price of those cards actually ends up going up, not down. I've watched it happen for over 20 years. That is how it actually works. So I am absolutely a proponent of letting people play, which is why I support proxies. Not counterfeits, not fake cards, proxies. And the difference is, in this video, it's already been too long, but a proxy makes no attempt to deceive anybody. A proxy is just a stand-in. It's an obvious fake. A counterfeit tries to deceive people. It tries to make people think it's a real card. Totally different, right? I support proxies, not counterfeits. So there we go. That's it. That's my reserve list video. If you guys are still here, Thanks for watching this entire time. Please send this video to the professor. Send this video to your friends. Please, if you want to discuss it, that'd be great. Go below, leave a comment, discuss it with me. Just please be polite with each other, right? And let's stop propagating bad information. Bye, everybody.